You know, if you take a look at how people to this day still react to the death of George Floyd, and then you look at how they react to what Kyle Rittenhouse did, and you can't see the glaring racism there, then you're just refusing to see it because it's that painfully obvious. If you watch how people reacted to the BLM protest of 2020, and then you watch how they reacted to and are still reacting to the insurrection on January 6th, and you can't see the glaring racism that's there, then you're just refusing to see it because it's painfully obvious. And that's coming from a guy who grew up on the Southeast Kentucky, East Tennessee border. I went to a grade school. The entire time I was there was no black kids. There was no black kids in the holler that I grew up in. When I made it to middle school, 7th and 8th grade, there might have been one black kid there. I think there was one biracial kid. Then when I get over to high school, I'm there for 4 years. I might have seen 3 or 4 black kids tops. And there might have been one in my graduating class. I can't remember. I was 18 years old before I ever set foot in a black person's home, and I was 18 years old before a black person ever set foot into mine. And that's because I got out of school, went and got a job, and became friends with a black person at work. So anything that I learned about racism, I definitely didn't learn it, growing up in the holler I did in Southeast Kentucky. Anything that I learned on my own because I always went out and educated myself on subjects like that. I was the kid back in high school that went to the library on his breaks and checked out a book because I was always fascinated with other people and their way of life and their struggles and what they went through. I was always fascinated by other cultures, other religions, other ideologies, other belief systems. I always wanted to hear every side of the story. So I spent most of my time in the library at school just reading books. That's why I get so irritated about the whole banned book subject. But, anything that I learned myself. And along the way, I had to face a whole lot of uncomfortable truths. And there was a lot of things I realized I was being taught and had been taught that was absolute bullshit. I had to come to grips with that. And I had to learn how to move past a lot of certain things and let certain things go and just do better, But then you make it to 2020 and you realize just how naive you've been the entire time. You realize, man, I thought things were getting better. I thought we were going to be okay. And then you realize that we were not okay and that we still have a long way to go in the whole argument. Because I will never forget in 2020, watching the death of George Floyd and watching how people reacted to it. That's where I learned the most about racism, was watching how people reacted to certain events. You could listen to people talk and tell their stories all day long. You could read about it all day long. But really, to me, where you really learned the most was just watching how people reacted to the events. And in 2020, I've never been more stunned at just the glaring hypocrisy. You sit and watch George Floyd die and you say to yourself, damn, that's fucked up. Anybody, regardless of your race, you should admit that's pretty fucked up. But people went out of their way to immediately start demonizing George Floyd. They wanted to know all about his criminal past. And, well, then he deserved it. He should have just complied with law enforcement. You can't blame that law enforcement officer. You can't blame him. And somehow the officer ends up becoming the hero in the story, and he's the victim when he gets put in jail. And you're sitting there saying to yourself, how the fuck can that be? And then meanwhile, you turn around and you got Kyle Rittenhouse, and you watch how people react to that, and they make every excuse to condone what he did. They don't want to see his criminal background. They don't want to talk about his criminal past. None of that. He's not a thief. He's not a thug. He's nothing. He's a hero. He's a vigilante. And people to this day, whenever I talk about him, I get more comments than anything else I talk about because people get that passionate defending that kid. And I've said till I'm blue in the face, do you really think a black kid could have made it as far as Kyle did carrying that same weapon? Do you really think he would have made it that far? And when I say things like that, people will say, oh, well, you're just making it about race, man. You're the racist because you saw the racism in it. And then you watch how upset people got, how riled they got over the BLM protests. They got so bent out of shape over a Starbucks or a Wendy's or a Target getting burned. Oh man, these people should comply with law enforcement. This is bullshit. This is not how you act. This is not how you react to something. And you sit and say to them, well, a protest is the voice of the unheard. Well, I don't care. That's not how you react. You don't do it that way. Well, what about taking a knee? No, you don't do it that way either. That's disrespectful. Get the son of a bitch off the field. And then you watch how they react when they lose an election. And they go and try to overthrow the government, hang the vice president. They desecrate the Capitol. And when you say, I thought that's not how you're supposed to protest, we have every right to. And when you point out the glaring racism and all of that, people get bent out of shape and says that you're the one making it about race. You know, we will sit, and I'm guilty of this myself. I've studied Charles Manson. I've got every book on the subject. If you ever need to know about him, I'm your guy, okay? I've studied the guy my whole life. Been fascinated with it for whatever reason. Read every book and every angle on the subject I can get my hands on. And people will sit and they'll study about Manson. They'll study these serial killers like John Wayne Gacy and Jeffrey Dahmer and all these people. And they'll sit and study them. And they'll ask themselves, you know, what made this person tick? Where did this person come from, man? And they'll sit and make movies about them. And over time, the people just kind of become little folk heroes. And they got their own little fan clubs. And you catch yourself saying, yeah, my favorite serial killer is so-and-so. And it's like, it's pretty damn ridiculous. And then a black man gets unalived unjustly by the police. And suddenly nobody wants to dive in and study him that hard. Nobody wants to figure out where he came from and the struggles he faced. They just want to, as fast as possible, demonize him, make him the worst human being on earth, and shove it under the rug. And it is one of the most frustrating things that I've ever talked about with people. And it's so frustrating to talk about it with people who otherwise are decent people. It's like people that you feel in your heart of hearts, like, you know, I think this person's a good person at heart. Why do they see things this way? Why is it they could be so good one second and turn around and be so cruel and make such cold-hearted jokes and just make light of such serious issues? How could they be that and do it at the same time? It just makes absolutely no sense to me. And I'm a white guy from East Tennessee. So there's no way in the world that I could ever imagine what it would be like to be black and be in America. My heart truly goes out to you because I don't know. I just know from my point of view how frustrating it is. I can't imagine what it would be like having to have that argument every day. But I'm not sitting here trying to be no warrior. I'm not sitting here trying to be an ally necessarily as much as I am. I'm just trying to point out the glaring hypocrisy that I see. And I want people to know that I care, you know, and I want people to know that I'm not like the rest of them. When I started making these kind of videos, I had the thought process of, well, do I change the way I dress? Do I doctor up my accent just a tad so people won't think I'm the biggest redneck piece of trash in the world? And then I said, you know what? No, I'm just going to go ahead and dress this way and sound this way and let people know that not all of us are the bigoted assholes that you've been surrounded by your whole life. There's a whole lot of us over here that is on your side and we're listening. And it's not about trying to claim no badge of honor. It's just about standing up for what's right.